Hello all, welcome back to CyberSeek, and today, as you can see my screen, today we are going to talk about MITRE framework, and in that we will start with the tactics and discussion of the techniques. Like we will begin with initial access and then execution and so forth and so on. So we are not going to cover everything in a single day. One at a time we will be covering it. So today I'll be discussing initial access and some part of execution, and in that we'll be discussing which are the most common techniques usually used by the attackers or APT groups in order to take initial steps within that organization, and then they can proceed on with taking persistence into the compromised system or elevating the privileges or maybe defense evasion and so forth. So actually, this MITRE framework helps you understand that whenever an attack happens on an organization or a group of organization, so these are the most common steps which are taken by the attackers so that the compromise of an organization can be done. Like the initial steps is taking initial access, and then the execution some part is taken, then the techniques moves on from persistence, privilege escalation and so forth, and it ends with impact. So it is not necessary that all the attacks of an APT group happens with the same direction in an organized way. Sometimes what happens, like initial access is taking place and execution and the persistence is done. So the persistence is done in the registry of an organization, or you can say of a workstation that is compromised, and from that it tries to the particular malicious code within malicious payload within the organization. Actually it tries to connect to C2 panel and tries to maintain the persistence for the installation of further post exploitation tool within the system, and then the impact could be different. So you can see that all the tactics and techniques does not take place in a organized way. It depends upon what an APT group is trying to achieve, what is the motive of the attackers, and what they exactly want to happen with the organization that they are trying to compromise. So it's not necessary that in every attack all these 11 tactics is going to get covered. Maybe 5, 6, maybe 2, 3 is going to get covered, or maybe sometimes what happens, all the 11 ones get covered right from the initial access till the impact. So here about talking about the initial access, today we are going to start only with the initial access, and the next day we'll be learning about execution and after that persistence. So the most common techniques of initial access is, I'll start ranking with the 1, 2, 3 and so on. So the most common is exploit public facing application, then the phishing is the most common one, after which supply chain compromise is there. And if we talk about more things, then drive-by compromise happens, external remote services, and yeah, these many things. So we have covered drive-by compromise 1, exploit public facing application is the 2, and then external remote services 3, phishing 4, supply chain 5. See, replication through removal media, I'll talk about that later. Sometimes it is covered as a techniques in initial access, but it is very rare these days. It happens with only disconnected systems or air gap systems, where the SCADA system is another thing. If there is any nuclear power or if there is any machinery for which the internet connectivity is prohibited, in that cases the use of USB or media devices are used. In that, this is a technique that takes place by an attacker's end to compromise any organization. So that is very rare these days, and the most common one I've already told you. So starting with the drive-by compromise, we will see what exactly it is. Okay, drive-by compromise, it takes the gain access to the system is done usually by visiting the websites. Like suppose you are on a normal day, you are surfing or you're browsing something, and you come across a website that has a lot of ads and that does not look legitimate. So here what happens, by searching or browsing you come across any website, and through that further things can take place. Like suppose you can click on some other ads or any clickable attachment on link, or if you have dropped yourself to a web browser, These techniques also talk about the user's web browser is typically targeted for exploitation and the compromised websites. Like you have dropped yourself on a compromised website, and that can take you to any redirected malicious website or a malicious act. So from that you can also become a part of getting compromised. I mean to say that if there is any clickable things or something happens, like you come across while browsing or while doing the surfing or online internet surfing or searching of the data, from there the drive-by compromise happens. And sometimes what happens, you have logged into a particular system, or maybe you have logged into any account. In that, the token which is that application access token, it can be compromised, it can be acquired, or the web session token, or you can say cookie, can be acquired. From that you can be compromised, and your session, if does not expire from the server's end, if it is still validated and it has not been expired from the server's end, then from that particular session ID, the attacker can gain access to your account. So that time the attacker does not need your login credentials, because the session which you had already logged in with could not get expired from the server end, as it did not get validated from server that it should have expired after the logout. So using that same application token, or can say same session ID, the attacker can gain access to your particular account. And after that, exploit public facing application. In that, the most example, a common example is, like, suppose DMZ is a zone between the intranet and internet for an organization where the public facing servers is done. Like some of the servers which has been defined by the organization that it will be used only by the internet, and no other people from all across the internet is going to get access to that particular server. And that DMZ has a web servers, application servers for external people outside the organization over the internet. They are trying to access to a particular web services for that particular organization that has been placed in DMZ. And in that, if there is any exploitation or vulnerabilities there, that can be exploited. In that sense, I'm saying. So there are also a lot of examples, like for log4j. Like it was a library that was used in multiple you can say applications, and since that library was used in multiple application, and this library has a vulnerability, and in many of the, you can say, public facing applications, it was used open source applications as well. So from there also the exploitation can be done, since the vulnerability was available in this particular library. And other examples could be, like, it is not, the example could also belong to, you can say, databases as well. Like sometimes vulnerability is also available in databases, and if that database is publicly accessible, so from there also the initial access can be taken place. So here we will see what the particular exploit public facing application is talking about. Okay, adversaries may attempt to take advantage of weaknesses in the internet facing. Okay, as I mentioned, the weaknesses which is available in the internet facing computer, program or softwares. Even it could be softwares, like I mentioned about here, the open source software used to make use of log4j. So this particular library, as it was exploitable, it was vulnerable. So other softwares and other you can say programs which used to use this library was also exploitable. And we can say software data commands in order to get unintended and unanticipated behavior. Okay, the weaknesses in the system has a bug, glitch or any design vulnerability. As I told you, these applications are often websites but also includes databases as well. As I mentioned that here you got to see then what we have other things. So it is just trying to provide some basic information. Like it could be, the vulnerability could also be available in the standard services. If some services are also vulnerable, and that particular services is also used not within the organization but all across the globe. So if the services is vulnerable and it is being used somewhere else, so it is a probability that within the organization it can be also exploited by the attackers. And sometimes what happens, Even the protocols also get vulnerable due to the unpatched version or maybe the use of old versions and any other applications with the internet accessible open sockets. Okay, so these are the things. And yeah, definitely it is a part like as I've already mentioned that these tactics are somehow interlinked to each other, not in an organized way, but yeah, somehow they are related. Like for this one, it is mentioned that if any software data command or you can say any protocol anything is exploited to public facing application, then it can also lead to somehow in exploitation for defense evasion. Okay, so the intermediate step is not mentioned, but here it is saying that depending upon the flaw being exploited, that may also include exploitation for defense evasion. So here you can see this initial access has this technique which is somehow interlinked with these one defense evasion. Here you can see there will be definitely something like exploitation for defense evasion. So you can see that the connectivity is somehow there. Okay, but the thing is here it is not mentioned the steps, and maybe in some other articles if you come across the internet you may get some articles which will definitely tell you the steps because of which the initial access and defense evasion is linked. Okay, moving forward, we have external remote services. In that, we see we don't have any other things. Okay, here it is mentioning about that external facing remote services. Like the most common example is VPNs. We have VPNs for the organization. It is mandatory that for every office laptop, you should have a VPN client, and that will connect you to the VPN servers. Suppose that in the work from home scenarios, you are sitting from the home and then connecting yourself to VPN from VPN client to VPN service. So that is also a part of same thing. Like you are sitting on an external location, from there you are taking use of some software that is allowing you to connect you to the organization's internet. So here it is mentioning the same thing. I'll read out for you. Adversaries may leverage external facing remote services to initially access or persist within a network. Okay. Remote services such as VPN, Citrix, and other access mechanisms allow users to connect to internal enterprise network resources from external location, like work from home. In that, your home is an external location, and it allows by the medium of VPN service and client software to connect you to the internal enterprise network of an organization. So this is the same example, and some other examples are also mentioned like Windows remote management, VNC servers are also there for the same things. Like for Mac is also there, and yeah, it is also the other things are just to read out and nothing much. The most important thing was this paragraph which I've already read out to you, and it also tells you that it leads to somehow to valid accounts. Like valid accounts, you can see it is available with all the tactics. Like here initial access is there, then with this persistence it is there, then with privilege escalation it is there, then with we'll see. Okay, so okay, not all the tactics, but yeah, definitely it is included. I'll tell you what valid accounts is in the later parts. Okay, moving forward to hardware additions. I'll not tell you about many things about it, but in order to just make you understand that the sometimes vulnerability, or you can say there are some problems that are also available in the hardware systems, which includes initial access. I mean, which also becomes a major part by the attacker, that they also try to make use of hardware devices which are exploitable, or which through which they can gain access into the system. Like if we say okay, adversaries may introduce computer accessories, yeah, computers or networking hardware into a system or a network that can be used as a vector to gain access. I told you about the hardware systems. It could be at any point of time. And scarce and readiness. Okay, so it is not talking about much. So this is the thing. And phishing, as you know, it is the most common one. As you can see, it has a lot of things to tell you. Okay, phishing, it's the most common one as it is a part of social engineering act where where the attacker can leverage your details that are available over the social media or anywhere all across the internet. So spear phishing is one of the technique where it includes attachment or maybe some service or any link, clickable link. Like through email phishing, you get some clickable link or attachments, and that if you don't read out all the contents carefully, obviously you're going to fall for that phishing alert. Uh, so here it mentioned that they are sending the phishing SMS messages to gain access to the victim system. So it is trying to compromise one of the systems so that from that one system it can leverage to doing other things within the same organization, or moving to lateral horizontally, or moving to horizontally, or moving to vertically. It depends upon the infrastructure of that particular organization. Like, okay, all forms of phishing are electronically serviced email. Okay, it's talking about the email phishing. So phishing can be targeted knowing as a spear phishing. In spear phishing, a specific individual. Spear phishing is about the specific individual in targeting a specific people. Okay, a company, industry, and will be targeted by the adversary. Okay, gets non-targeted phishing. Okay, so I've talked about that. And the most common one, the next one, is supply chain compromise. So supply chain compromise, the basic example is of solar winds. So as you know that last year we had a lot of issues with solar winds, and it was a product that was used with many 500 fortune companies. So the problem with that particular or you can say the supply chain compromise, initial access, that particular vulnerability was there in that. So due to that thing, the attackers were able to compromise different organizations of different aspects. So that was the thing where you can see that supply chain compromise means a single product being used by many multiple organizations. If that is, I mean, if any vulnerability, if any issue with that product is there, or if any manipulation is there, then the thing is other organization using that same product is vulnerable to that particular thing. So here it is also mentioning about that adversaries may manipulate products or product delivery mechanism prior to the receipt by a final consumer for the purpose of data or system. Okay, so it's not talking about much thing as it did not provide you a lot of example, but SolarWind was one such example of supply chain compromise where one product being used by many companies got compromised, and they definitely had a lot of business losses at that point of time. So I just providing you some of the stages where it includes manipulation of development data, development tools, manipulation of development environment, manipulation of source code repositories, public or private, manipulation of source code in open source dependencies. Okay, distribution, compromise, infected system images, just talking about the basic thing. But I'll tell you, okay, so it is talking about the compromised software supply chain. Sometimes what happens if the product is in a hardware structure, is tangible, so in that particular thing, compromise can be taken place from that hardware supply chain and the software dependencies and developments. Sometimes what happens, the software dependency developments are also provided by a third party organization to many multiple companies, many main companies, major companies. So they are also using that. In that case, what happens, since they have used compromised system dependencies, you can say, or software dependencies or a vulnerable system, so it can also impact many such companies which are using the same product. Okay, we will see if we have anything. They did not provide any such that example. I'm looking for some good one. Let me test that again. Okay. Okay, no problem. Whatever is there for the compromised supply chain, we will read it out. Okay, adversaries may manipulate application software prior to the receipt by a final consumer for the purpose. Okay, supply chain compromise of a system of a software can take place in a number of ways, including manipulation of the application source code. Yeah, if the product has any issue with the application source code, manipulation of update, distribution mechanism for the software, if any issue with that particular product is, and it is being used by many companies, obviously those consumers will also be indirectly impacted and may have a huge loss in terms of businesses logics. Okay, after that we have to talk about something, just a slight awareness of this replication through social media. So as I already mentioned you that this is possible only with the disconnected or air gap systems, mostly in the nuclear power plants, or you can say where the tight security is required and no internet connectivity is required, so that the security can be maintained of that particular area, that are called air gap systems. So in that cases the use of USB cables is very easy, where it includes by copying of malware to a removable media and then taking advantage of auto run features. Like you have to just plug the USB into any of the devices of air gap systems, and obviously that particular systems take advantage and it starts replicating based on the malware, what kind of malware it has. It is a worm or something, it will start to replicate itself on other similar systems, workstations in that particular air gap networks. So in some cases this replication through removable media, it also becomes a part of lateral movement. Okay, so this is another tactic which is indirectly linked with initial gain. Okay, so what is it is talking about? This may occur through modification of executable files stored on a removable media by copying malware and renaming it to look like a legitimate file to trick users into executing it on a separate system. Okay. In this case of initial access, this may occur through manual manipulation of media, modification of systems used to initially format the media and other things. So it's the same thing. There is nothing much like. The main important thing is it is used in the disconnected air gap networks. The basic example is the Stuxnet, which was used to indirectly compromise the hardware structures of the nuclear power plant. So you can read out that particular about the Stuxnet malware, where the worm was used by means of USB cables, was attached to one of the workstations, and it somehow compromised the whole structure. Okay, after that, the only important thing, this is not important, just wanted to make you aware of what it is, what valid accounts are. So valid account means like whatever default accounts, domain accounts, local accounts or cloud accounts are available in the organization. So these kind of accounts are available since there are multiple employees in the organization. And sometimes what happens, the initial access takes place by compromising those accounts, those valid accounts. Okay, so it says that adversaries may obtain or abuse the credentials of the existing accounts, which means which is already present in the organization. If somehow the credentials are compromised of that existing accounts, they may help in taking place of persistence, privilege escalation or defense evasion. So this has been a basic one, where it further says that compromised credentials may be used to bypass access control placed on various resources on systems within the network, and may even be used for persistent access to remote systems and externally available services such as VPN, Outlook, web access and remote desktop and other things. So compromised credentials may also grant an adversary increased privilege to specific systems or access to restricted area of the network. Adversaries may choose not to use malware or tools in conjunction with the legitimate access those credentials provide to make it harder to detect their presence. So simple thing is, whatever availability of account is there, if somehow the credentials of that particular account of that organization belonging to that particular organization is compromised, there could be multiple things that can take place, like further tactics like persistence, privilege escalation and defense evasion can take place. Okay, so today we discussed initial access, the most common ones, and the other two are replication through removable media and valid accounts. These two are an additional information. Apart from that, we have discussed the important ones like drive-by compromise, exploit public-facing application, external remote services, phishing, and supply chain compromise. Okay, and in the next video, we'll be covering about execution, the most common techniques that are usually used by the attackers when they opt for the tactics execution. I have to tell you one thing. In initial access, phishing is one such techniques which is used in combination with the execution. Like phishing is used with phishing plus user execution, which is a part of execution, and phishing with exploit for client execution, like phishing plus command and scripting interpreter. So the thing is, initial access is somehow used by the attackers in combination with execution. Either it will be used with phishing plus user execution, phishing plus exploit for client execution, phishing plus command and scripting interpreter. So that was the bonus tip for today, and hope you have got some understanding about initial access and what are the common techniques that are used by the attacker. And that's all for today. Please like the video, and thanks for your patience for listening me. Hope to see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.